I feel like every video I release these days is also a channel update, which is probably because the analytics I have over here behind the curtain are almost willfully unhelpful. Sometimes low effort, off the cuff videos perform really well. Other times the labor intensive videos take off, but only once in a blue moon. Heck, the most popular video on the channel right now is my review of Later Alligator, which was sitting at less than 100 views for the first 4.5 months. So I've kind of given up trying to guess what will do well, which sort of frees me up to just say f it and make whatever I want. I also take suggestions from viewers, but that doesn't come up very often. This video is one of those labor-intensive ones I work really hard on, where I try to dig into some abstract concepts and trends that have very broad implications. And since you clicked on this video, I'm going to assume you like this kind of stuff, so I'll let you in on a little secret. From now on, I'll be leaving a little clue in the thumbnails of these more in-depth videos. In the corner, I'll put this little blue dot. It's innocuous to the average unsubbed viewer, but to you and me, it's a tip-off to the content. Before we get into the weeds, thank you for clicking on a video I worked hard on, and feel free to talk to me in the comments or elsewhere. I've even been thinking of setting up a Discord server just for fun, but I'm not really sure that the audience is big enough for that yet. Anyway, into the weeds we go. This is a video about YouTube's copyright system, which is an inherently complicated subject and kind of boring, so I'm going to do my best to have the editing at least be sort of entertaining. Right at the top here, I wanted to make it clear what this video is and what it is not. This video is a somewhat in-depth explanation of YouTube's copyright policies and YouTube's copyright practices, which are not one and the same. It's based on personal experience and content from other YouTubers that either directly or indirectly addresses YouTube's copyright policies and practices. This is not a highly technical look at how Content ID works. This is also not a discussion of the laws that govern copyright and fair use. I will touch on fair use, but it's a complicated subject of its own. My big goal here is to ask whether YouTube's copyright practices, as they are today, harm quality media criticism and analysis here on YouTube. I am not speaking on behalf of other creators, and I am not asserting that my personal experiences with YouTube's copyright practices are representative of other creators' experiences with those same practices. This video was written in good faith. I'm not trying to outright attack the platform or the copyright holders who claim videos. Before we get to criticism as a concept, let's lay out YouTube's copyright policies and compare them to the platform's copyright practices. I'll try not to bore you by just reading out YouTube's official copyright guidelines and policies. We would be here for a very, very long time, but the central premise is that you can't use copyrighted material in your YouTube videos unless you have the right to use that content in that form. So just as a hypothetical, if a creator reached out to a giant movie studio asking for permission to use footage from one of their movies, and they got the okay, that creator would have the legal right to use that footage in that way. The video would probably still get a copyright claim triggered by Content ID, but if it went into review, the creator should be let off the hook. If you don't have the legal right to use copyrighted material, then you just can't. On the face of it, sounds pretty clear, right? The most blatant copyright infringement possible on YouTube would be to upload an unaltered copyrighted work in full and then try to collect ad revenue on that video. From both legal and practical perspectives, yeah, you shouldn't be able to do that. You didn't create the work, and any ad revenue collected from that work would essentially be theft. But I'm not too concerned about that because not many serious YouTubers try to do that sort of thing anyway. You'll still see some of those trashy cut-up versions of animated shows every now and then, but I can't imagine they're making any money on those. For most YouTubers, being conscious of copyright guidelines is relatively simple, at least on the surface. Most YouTubers just need to worry about dealing with the various types of copyright-based claims and takedowns. So, algorithmic systems match content with the original work, work, and they tend to function much more efficiently with sound and music, probably because it's relatively simple to match waveforms. Depending on specifics, identification of copyrighted content can lead to different actions. The most mild of those actions is a copyright claim. If even a small portion of the video contains copyrighted material that has been successfully identified, the copyright holder then automatically gets the monetization rights to the whole video. So even if you don't have the option to monetize any of the videos on your channel because you're not a member of the partners program or whatever they call it, the copyright holder can monetize that video if they want and collect the ad revenue from it. By the way, if you see ads on any of my videos at the time of publishing, it's almost definitely because of a copyright claim. I can't run ads on anything right now. Copyright claims don't negatively affect your channel's official standing, though these can be extremely frustrating for professional creators who stand to lose a lot of money by having their monetization rights to a particular video seized, especially if they followed fair use guidelines when integrating that copyrighted material, but I'm going to have to save fair use for later. The other type of copyright action that can be taken against creators is copyright takedowns. Copyright takedowns are serious business. They require that the copyright holder submits a formal notice, and if everything checks out with that notice, YouTube has to take the video down. Then the creator's channel is issued a copyright strike. Following your first ever copyright strike, you have to attend copyright school, which I assume is a series of videos telling you that copyright infringement is bad. YouTube wouldn't let me go to copyright school when I was researching this because I don't have any takedowns on my record, but I did find this little gem hosted by YouTube in 2011. It's a Happy Tree Friends short where the copyright infringing character, Russell, is literally wearing a pirate's hat. Very subtle, guys. The video does acknowledge fair use, but in a very glib way, and it even suggests that if you're not sure whether your video constitutes fair use, you should consult with a copyright attorney. It feels to me like telling someone who can't afford the repairs on their car to just buy a new one. It's so simple. So a copyright strike has a cooldown of 3 months. If your channel accumulates 3 copyright strikes within this period, your channel is terminated. And I guess the number's 3 because baseball, maybe? So you can appeal each strike and even channel termination, but if the copyright holder was serious enough to issue takedowns, they're probably not going to be willing to listen to your arguments all that much, and they also have the ability to lean on expensive legal counsel. YouTube facilitates these appeals, but on a practical level, I would have to assume that the company would have many practical reasons for wanting to keep the issuing copyright holder happy. That's speculation, of course, but it leads into my big problem with YouTube's copyright policies and practices: the vast disparity of power determined by revenue and financial resources, which of course also translate to legal counsel. This is the perfect time to move on to YouTube's copyright practices. In other words, how these policies actually shake out in real life. So the biggest reason I wanted to separate policies from practices is that there is a pretty wide gap between the two. On paper, YouTube and copyright holders are supposed to respect fair use and only take action when fair use is violated. But in practice, this is a joke. I mean, we're used to this by now, right? A company says one thing, but then does something very, very different, and no one successfully calls them out on it. You're just never going to get an honest response from the company, except maybe by accident, or if they stand to lose money by not admitting it. That reminds me, I made this video on corporate response to criticism within harm industries. You can check it out here. To use an example from that video, we know that predatory microtransactions in video games can be extremely harmful to players. And while some video game studios and publishers have admitted this as well, companies that rely heavily on these monetization methods will continue to defend these practices until it's no longer profitable to do so. And to demonstrate that YouTube and copyright holders regularly refuse to respect fair use of copyrighted content, I'll be using some examples from popular YouTube videos. But first, it's time for a quick rundown on fair use. Like many concepts related to law and jurisprudence, fair use is much more complicated than it might seem, and I will happily admit that there are some creators out there who will use fair use as a blanket excuse for using copyrighted content in some form, even if they're not actually following the tenets of fair use. Also, it's open to interpretation, like basically every other law and legal precedent on the books, which is why we have judges to interpret the law in relation to specific situations. At least that's that's the basic idea. I've heard many different explanations of fair use in the past, but for this video, I have referred to an article from Stanford. As the article notes, there are no hard rules here, just guidelines. Fair use is broken down into two categories: commentary or criticism and parody. Since this video is about copyrighted material in relation to online criticism, I'll be focusing on this section. If you're critiquing copyrighted material, you can use some of that material to provide benefits to your audience and enhance your criticism. There are four major factors considered in fair use legal cases: purpose of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and substantiality of the portion used, and the effect of this use on the potential market. To quote the article, "At issue is whether the material has been used to help create something new or merely copied verbatim into another work. Purposes such as scholarship, research, or education may also qualify as transformative uses because the work is the subject of review or commentary. Determining the transformative quality of a work is incredibly amorphous, but the article notes in an example that certain instances of juxtaposing the copyrighted material with other work can support a fair use argument. As for the nature of the copyrighted work, apparently it's safer to use material from factual nonfiction work than from fictional work. Amount and substantiality of the portion used is another tricky one, since the substantiality bit is all about whether the used portions constitute the essence or heart of the work in question, which is obviously pretty subjective. Effects on a potential market basically means that you can't deprive the copyright holder of potential income with your work. So if you take someone's song and present it to a new audience for the first time, making money from it in the process, that's a no-go. You're depriving the copyright holder of money they could have earned from that audience. Parody songs, for example, tend to be fine, while remixes stand on much less stable legal ground. Yes, that remix is a new thing, but it's very heavily based on an existing work made by someone else. To sum all of this up, it's tricky. In legal cases involving fair use, actual human beings do their best to arrive at the just outcome. There's a lot of interpretation happening all over the place. Now, when an algorithm scans YouTube videos for copyrighted content, is that algorithm taking all of these nuances and factors into account? I'll give you 5 seconds to take a guess. No. It's not. It's just not. I don't want to drag Content ID through the mud. I didn't build it. I don't know every detail of how it functions and makes decisions, but I have seen how it operates. And it's very clear that it's following some very strict rules that don't actually account for fair use in any significant way. And this is where I can bring in some examples. In her massive review and discussion of the Vampire Diaries television show, the vast majority of which does not contain copyrighted content, Jenny Nicholson notes that the video received a copyright claim and that she wouldn't be making any money from it.
Get that coin, girl. Unlike poor LJ Smith, and unlike me for that matter, there's no way I'm making a dime off this video after I had the gall to use clips from the show I'm talking about, and the clips have that copyrighted backing music. Enjoy your pennies, Katy Perry.
Is her usage of clips from the show fair use? As far as I can tell, absolutely, because it's transformative. This giant review of the entire series is not providing the same product as the show itself, not even a similar product. It's also just a review. It's educational as well. But did Content ID respect any of that? Well, of course not. Next up, musician Rick Beato posted an angry video about one of the videos in his What Makes This Song Great series. For context, this is a series where he goes through popular songs and analyzes them. He might talk about relevant music theory or about the performances, anything that's worth noting about the song, and he does this to celebrate music and artists and to educate listeners on top of outright promoting work that might not be familiar to younger listeners. He uses clips from the songs in question, which makes perfect sense. It would be insane to just ask viewers to find their own way to listen to each song and then instruct them to play a certain section of the song so that he can comment on it. According to fair use guidelines, this is indeed transformative. He's providing commentary on the copyrighted work, and he's definitely not negatively affecting relevant markets. No one's gonna say, oh hey, I'd love to listen to that one Cheap Trick song. I think I'll pop on an analytical video about it. If anything, these videos promote the copyrighted content, essentially acting as advertising. And I want to linger on this idea for a second. The idea of reviews and commentary acting as positive marketing. Yes, this idea has a basis in fair use guidelines, specifically the effect on potential markets factor, but I also think that on a practical level, media companies need to come to grips with how beneficial it can be for them to just let YouTubers talk about and show off their products, especially when they're saying nice things about the product and encouraging other people to consume that product. Even the video game industry, a logy, swollen, stubborn industry painfully behind the times, has started to recognize this. Notably, Nintendo, one of the most old-fashioned video companies out there, did a 180 on their policy in terms of showing game footage in videos. Prior to this, Nintendo copyright claimed videos that showed their games at all, which even at the time was uncommon in the gaming sector of YouTube. But for some reason, Nintendo was taking all the ad revenue on these videos.
Wake the fuck up, Nintendo. Why are you taking money directly from YouTubers who give you free advertising?
Until eventually they reversed this practice.
One of the very best Nintendo-related things to happen in 2019 came right at the very start of the year. They announced that they would no longer be flagging videos and taking their ad revenue simply for featuring audio or visual elements from Nintendo games. For YouTubers such as myself, this was everything as exciting.
Which I have to assume only happened because someone finally sat the big boys down and very slowly explained how people posting fun times with their games made for excellent marketing, and that they shouldn't punish people who are giving them free advertising. In other words, even if a company deems that usage of copyrighted content isn't strictly fair use, maybe they should take this other element into consideration, not even for altruistic reasons, but just for reasons of profit. If you want more on the topic, Yakko did a nice video on video game music and pointed out that Nintendo still has an extremely harsh approach to taking down uploads of music from their games, which just doesn't make any sense, especially because they don't offer that music for sale anywhere. All right. But back to Beato, he seems pretty nice. I mean, I like his work, okay. But as for this whole situation with the strike, he received a copyright strike because of a video he made about a song by The Cars. He admits in this video that for stuff in this series, he usually receives a copyright claim, loses the monetization rights, and he's fine with that.
I have a lot of videos that are demonetized, so I make no money, it all goes to them.
I would argue that it's both legally and ethically reprehensible for copyright holders to collect ad revenue on analytical videos they didn't make. There's no defense for that. The copyright holders, record labels in this example, just happen to benefit from the especially aggressive content ID handling of music. And if a creator wants to challenge them on that, well, then those record labels have some very expensive legal teams just waiting for the chance to pile drive them into the earth. To put this another way, YouTube's copyright system in practice illustrates how many large companies impose vast amounts of power on people who don't have the will or the resources to even try to fight back. I know I should have saved this point for later in the video, but I may as well bring it up here. Even though it's very clear that companies are not respecting the law, the legal law, there is no practical resource to oppose this abuse of power. So how did things shake out for Beato? Well, he challenged the strike and got it removed. According to him, he had success by making the issue very public through videos posted to his massively popular channel and through action on Twitter, where music labels are essentially forced to confront these tweets as a threat to PR. In certain cases, some of the actual musicians involved expressed frustration with the labels that were taking these actions against creators.
The thing with Twitter is that all the major labels and publishers have Twitter accounts. Steve Lukather was one of the first people that commented. He tagged UMG and Sony. Well, so did a bunch of other musicians, well-known musicians, tagged them. When people of that stature tags these things, they see it. So the first strike was lifted within, I think, 5 hours.
To put it another way, a company did a bad thing and stood by it until PR and profitability were threatened. That's the rule, isn't it? And I've got more of this stuff too. Who's next? Adam from Your Movie Sucks has kind of established himself as an activist in the area of fair use on YouTube, and during a stream, he outright told people how Content ID tends to flag copyrighted material.
If you have seamless footage of a copyrighted material and you keep it under 10 seconds, then you won't be claimed. For music, You want to make sure that that's like under 8 seconds.
Based on my own experiences, there's a lot of variation here. Sometimes stuff will get claimed after only 4 seconds. Also, different companies seem to use Content ID very differently, and sometimes they won't claim a full minute of one episode of a TV show, but then claim 3 seconds of a different episode. That's what happened with my video on Australian animation. Only one episode of YOLO Crystal Fantasy got claimed, but then, of course, to avoid the claim, I had to take the whole video down and re-upload it after some tiny tweaks to that footage, which probably added another 8 hours to the process. Why does Content ID work this way? Why is it very literally using strict time limits to determine whether something is or is not fair use? Remember all that fair use talk we went through earlier? I don't know about you, but I don't remember any mention of somehow crossing the line after 9 seconds of uninterrupted copyrighted footage have been used. There is something in the guidelines about the amount of copyrighted material used in reference to the original work, but there's no stipulation about time limits at all. It kinda seems like they told the algorithm in question to look for content of a certain length, completely ignoring context in the process. In fact, these tips from Adam are why I stopped getting so many claims on my videos. When I started the channel, basically every video got claimed, and most of those claims are still there today. But after I started keeping clips short, the problem mostly resolved itself. The issue here is that putting copyrighted footage into a video at all is very stressful. Even if I think it would make the video a lot better, I just have to hope that the clip I want to use is only a few seconds long, otherwise I have to slice it up so bad that it feels completely different. The editing is changed and the comedic timing is changed, or I have to obscure a significant portion of the footage that I want people to take a close look at, with one of my good friends, the copyright bots. Look at them go. They even make sounds too. Based on what I've heard, most people don't want to challenge standard copyright claims, either because it's a hassle or because they feel intimidated. And that feeling of intimidation isn't unwarranted either, especially regarding the more severe copyright takedowns. This is where abuse of the system and a refusal to respect fair use gets really dangerous. Earlier this year, Jim Sterling released an impressions video about a game from a developer called Gilson B. Pontus. Sterling has been extremely critical of Pontus's work in the past, but apparently this latest one was the tipping point for the developer. Gilson issued multiple copyright takedowns for this video and other videos that Sterling had made about his other games. Apparently, all of these takedowns were accepted upon submission, and they constituted enough copyright strikes to threaten Sterling's channel with termination. Again, some context. Sterling has been building this channel for many years, and they have released hundreds of videos. They currently have hundreds of thousands of subscribers as well, but a developer got upset that Sterling was calling out these games for being trashy products meant to fleece people out of their money, and he decided to falsely claim copyright infringement in an attempt to destroy the entire channel, which of course would have had a substantial impact on Sterling's livelihood because this is what they do professionally. Now, did the videos constitute copyright infringement? No, I think I can say that confidently. For one thing, a video about any video game is immediately transformative because it's not providing the viewer with the actual experience of playing the game. It's video footage of someone else playing the game with audio commentary which on its own constitutes transformation in my eyes because the game doesn't contain that commentary inherently. Also, again, reviews and commentary of a product are protected under fair use, but despite the obvious abuse of YouTube's copyright strike system and policies, Sterling made it clear in a follow-up video that Pontus only backed off because Sterling had access to a lawyer who was more than ready to take the dispute to court. Do you see any parallels between this story and Rick Beato's situation? In both instances, the creator was in the legal right, but only had that legal right recognized because the creator happened to occupy a position of privilege, regardless of whether it was the privilege to make a public scene or to hire legal counsel or both. So that's the YouTube copyright mess in the world's largest nutshell. But I think it's time to move on to the actual premise of the video. Does all this stuff harm the creation of good criticism on YouTube? But the big giant takeaway on the copyright bullshit is that creators are vastly outmatched in copyright disputes in terms of power and resources, and this can lead to casual dismissal of fair use. Okay, we made it. Wasn't planning on the other stuff getting so big, but may as well have it all out there, right? So, down to brass tacks. Is the use of copyrighted material in any form necessary for creating quality media criticism or analysis? I hope this isn't too disappointing, but the answer is yes, sometimes. Obviously, the mind goes to written criticism and analysis as an example of how it can be done without using copyrighted material at all. Well, I guess music reviews regularly include lyrical excerpts, and that's using a portion of the work. But we can think of movie reviews, right? For decades, movie reviews existed only as written articles, which of course couldn't contain portions of movies. Well, other than quotes and stills. Then came television movie reviews and entire movie review programs, of which Siskel and Ebert was the gold standard. And as soon as it was possible to use footage from the movie in question, these shows did it. Of course, they had to receive this footage from each studio, so it was legally cleared as well. But even if it wasn't cleared ahead of time, it probably still would have fallen under fair use in most cases. This footage is used to enhance each review. And this is where you folks out there in the audience can join in. Imagine watching a Siskel and Ebert review of a movie you've never heard of, without any clips. If you just watched the review, just the talking of a movie you've never heard of, with only the poster as a reference point, would you say that it's a good review? Perhaps even more importantly, would you enjoy watching this review? Would you send it along to your friends? Because that's an important point to make about media criticism on YouTube. Yes, I think that critiquing something without being able to show any of it makes it much more difficult to substantiate or illustrate points, but we have to reckon with the fact that YouTube reviews are also entertainment in their own right. I've done this millions of times where I'll watch a review of a movie or a game that I don't care about in the least, and I never will, simply because each review is entertaining on its own. I enjoy the presentation, the reviewer's persona, and the writing. And if no one could use any footage or audio from the media they were directly addressing, or from any other media as a point of comparison, I would be far less likely to watch those videos. If you haven't ever tried out media criticism yourself, I'd like to put it this way. Imagine you've been asked to teach a chemistry class. You know your stuff, you have all these degrees, and you even have plenty of prior teaching experience. The classroom has all the required materials to explain complex chemistry concepts. In the middle of a lesson on chemical bonding, someone from the school shows up and says, "Oh, you know what, you can't use that model, actually. Sorry." And then a few minutes later, "Oh, sorry, we need to take that projector." And then finally, "Hey, you know what, we're gonna remove the textbooks and the chalkboard. But you'll be fine. Just talk about it. You're a great teacher, right? You don't need all this stuff." And okay, I'm sure that it's technically possible to thoroughly teach the concept of chemical bonding without any visuals or reference materials for your students. But why knowingly put a teacher in that position? Shouldn't they have the tools they need to do their job? And on the student side, things will immediately become more difficult. Not to mention, different people learn and understand things in different ways. And if you remove visuals and other examples, you're immediately putting certain people at a disadvantage. I feel pretty much the same way about video-based media criticism. Can it be done without using any of the media in question? Technically, yes. Would the review be more enjoyable and more useful if it did use some of the media? Also, yes. And again, different viewers have different needs and preferences. I talked to my friend about this recently. She makes videos and she streams on Twitch, and as a person with ADHD, she is very conscious of the need to keep her content interesting so that other people with ADHD can stay engaged and get something out of the content. So, alright, using pieces of the media in question has the potential to make the review itself more enjoyable and more effective. Now, if there was a great reason to prevent this use of copyrighted material, I would understand and accept that. Let's say usage of 10-second clips from major motion pictures in video reviews on YouTube has been proven to cause a drastic increase in baby seal deaths. There's no debating it. It is a 100% link of causation. In that case, I would support the banning of all copyrighted material in video reviews. Still not great for reviewers, but we would just need to accept it. But here, in reality, there isn't a good reason to so drastically limit the partial use of copyrighted material in in YouTube videos. And in practice, I see creators bending over backward to use copyrighted material in a way that has been deemed acceptable by the powers that be. But on the other side of the equation, I see copyright holders letting automated processes punish those creators in various ways without any visible consideration for the law or even just context. Moving on to the final major question of the video. For the life of me, I can't remember where I read this, but some smart person out there was talking about how critics, or rather criticism, is important to the well-being of a society. Regardless of who said it, I agree for the most part. Even if we limit this statement to media criticism and analysis, it holds up pretty well. Critiquing and analyzing media can be extremely valuable, and not just because it's a fun and useful exercise to talk about media and share various interpretations. It's also engaging and important to place specific works into historical and cultural contexts. Through analysis, media can be used to support or oppose social movements, aesthetic movements, or even political movements. As I've touched on here, media crit can even be its own form of entertainment. Criticism is useful. Talking about media is useful. We need good critics, and we need them to create good criticism, however we define that. In terms of the tools needed to make good criticism, well, that's what this whole video has been about. I do think that being able to use parts of the copyrighted work in question is helpful to the creation of good criticism, even if it isn't always strictly necessary. But what about the motivation for people to become good critics? For the moment, even just on YouTube alone, it seems there are thousands of people willing to talk about media in some form, even if they're not making any money from it. But if YouTube's copyright practices continue in this way, or if they get worse, are there still going to be thousands of people wanting to get into this field? Are they going to want to stay involved if they feel that their work is being severely limited? And to take this to an extreme, let's say that we get to a point where creators basically can't use any copyrighted content whatsoever, transforming reviews and analysis into essays that are just read into microphones. Would there still be large audiences excited to watch this kind of content? If I haven't stressed it enough already, media criticism is good for everyone. It's good for audiences who get to learn more about media and hear someone else's perspective, maybe even being entertained in the process. It's good for the critic who gets to create work that has an audience, and it's good for the companies and artists that produce the work being discussed. Even if an online critic completely rips on a piece of media, that video and the response to that video basically serves as extremely useful market testing data that could be used to make low-risk production decisions in the future. I don't think that's what should guide media creation, but that's a different topic. I don't want current critics to feel so limited, and I don't want potential critics on the up and up to get scared off by severe limitations and the threat of legal action. This is the last time I'll say it, but copyright practices on YouTube as they are now are not at all about adherence to legal rights. Instead, they are instances of corporate entities imposing absurd amounts of power on people who have little or no recourse to defend completely legal usage of table scraps belonging to those corporate entities. These practices place unnecessary limitations on work that has the potential to educate, stimulate, and inspire. And on the business side, these practices stifle what is essentially voluntary and unpaid promotion of products, a kind of promotion which has, in many cases, led to increased sales and general interest in those products. The way things are now is a lose, 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 lose. Is that enough of them? And just to add to the sting, while I've been working on this very video, I've noticed a new trend in my uploads where there are no copyright claims placed on the video during and after the upload, but then, days later, claims just appear. Aside from all of the rational arguments I've laid out here, I have one last argument against how YouTube and outside companies handle copyright claims and strikes, and it's my most subjective one yet. I'm tired. I haven't even been doing the YouTube thing for very long, and I'm already tired of how invasive this stuff has been. Copyright worries are always floating around in my mind, from writing to editing to uploading, and apparently even long after an upload is complete. complete. Those worries even impact the videos I've decided to make. There have been plenty of ideas I've had for videos, but I dropped them right away because I knew from experience that a certain media conglomerate was especially nasty when it came to copyright claims and takedowns. It's getting to the point where I barely want to talk about Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network shows, for instance, because I know that I won't even be able to use 5-second clips, so I'd be left talking about a show over still images or stock footage. A cynical person might say, well, that's just the way it is, and we have to deal with it, which is accurate, and for the moment, it's the only option. But I would say that it doesn't need to be this way. This is not a good way of doing things, and it wouldn't take much for the powers that be to ease the f up. But until that happens, if it ever happens, I'll keep making things, I guess. And if I'm lucky, you'll keep watching them. And since there's no easy way out of this aggressive, self-righteous tone, I'll just say thanks for stopping by.